I'm your host, Carolyn Solo, LCSW, EMDR therapist, and mom of 3 daughters. Thank you for joining me.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 144 of the Future Template Parent Podcast. I am your host, Dr. Carolyn Solo, PhD, LCSW, EMDR consultant, EMDR intensive therapist, coach for other EMDR therapists, mom of 3. And today, I want to talk about something that comes up all the time in my coaching with therapists who are launching intensives. It's the question and topic of, how do I restructure my practice from its current form, like 20, 25 clients a week, to a practice that accommodates intensives without disrupting my income too much, without causing me too much stress with current clients, without overpacking my schedule? How do I figure out what I should be offering that's going to get people? How do I even figure out the kind of practice structure I want to have? Do I still want to see some ongoing clients? Do I want 3-hour intensives, multiple 3-hour intensives? Do I want the 3-day, 15-hour intensive that I always talk about, and that's it? Do I want to offer some options to current clients and others to new clients? And, other questions I'm sure you can think of. And today's episode is going to be part 1 of a 2-part episode on this series, on this topic, a mini series, 2 episodes, because there's a lot of elements to it and a lot of things that I see people wrestling with. Today, we're going to talk first about why the 3-day model is such a good fit for clients and therapists, especially as you're thinking of this new structure, and a little bit on why I often see therapists offering like shorter intensives, like a half day, and why that can be a bit of a trap. And that's often an early part of their practice transition. They try that out and then they find out that it doesn't work that great for them. And really, I think this longer intensive offering, the 3-day, is such an ideal container. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the consult call and how it can help you see if someone really is going to be a good fit for whatever practice structure you are really clear on that you want, and how it can help you, really use that time to emphasize booking the service you actually want to be selling, not a watered down, lesser version, maybe because you're feeling scared of saying 3 days, $6,000. Also talking about, again, how this is that how the consult call helps with creating this safe container. And then we're going to talk about the vital importance of scheduling and pricing and payment policies that are clear. As once here's how I want to structure my practice, like here's what I want it to look like in terms of, weeks of doing this versus, 2 weeks of ongoing clients a month, 1 intensive week, 1 week off, whatever. And how scheduling, being really clear about scheduling and pricing and payment and what your policies are around all those things, that is going to, again, make that container of the 3-day intensive safe for the client and for you. So lots to cover. Let's get into it. And also, plug for coaching with me, we work on your individual plan for this, right? Like we work through all the nuts and bolts to make sure that you are really, really secure in what this should look like for you. And because I've worked with so many therapists on this and I've been through it myself, I have done a lot of the trial and error for you. And of course, you're going to make your own decisions, but I can advise you on what I have seen to be places where people get stuck and places that, in that transition can be really, really difficult. So I'm going to give you some of those tips now, but know that, of course, if you worked with me, we would go through the entire process together, making sure that you're making as few costly and difficult mistakes as possible, right? Okay, so you're like, yay, I offer intensives. You get a client on a consult call. They're like, I want that deep transformational work. But you are afraid, or maybe they're afraid, someone's afraid that they can't commit to this 3-day intensive. Maybe you're afraid of offering a full 3-day intensive because you're worried about whether or not they'll say yes, right? So you sensed a little bit on the call, you adjust. You say, oh, how about a half day? Maybe a series of half days. 3 half-day sessions, 3-hour intensives over 2 months. You're like, oh, I'm being accommodating. Maybe you feel like you're being more ethical, maybe. Yeah, that word is always very hot button for me. Maybe it feels like you're meeting them where they are. Of course, I want you to interrogate, are you actually offering it from a place of fear, which I argue is often the case? But anyway, so you offer that, right? Those, how about a half-day intensive? How about 3 half-day intensives spread out over a couple of months? They're like, okay. They come in, do the first one, they make some progress, and they stall. They don't finish. Targets don't get cleared as you hoped. And maybe there's more to do, but they don't come back. Maybe they finish what they pay for if you sell it as a package. But there's all this space in between those half-day intensives, and you don't get the same sort of momentum. Or maybe your model is pay as you go, right? You say, okay, pay for each 3-day and 3-hour intensive as we book it. And they're like, okay, I'm going to do 3. That's great. But they do 1 or they do 2 and they don't finish. You're not getting the clinical results you know are possible for them. You're not getting the financial return you're hoping for. And your schedule isn't getting that clarity and freedom that you want. It's getting cluttered and messy with these 3-hour here, 3-hour there, right? So I want you to know that if this has happened to you in your practice as you're moving towards intensives, it's very common. It's something I see again and again from lots of practitioners. One therapist I'm working with currently has had this experience and ditched that half-day model because when she would offer half-day intensives, clients would get what she described as that, like she get that initial fire, that early momentum, that sense of possibility after the first one. Then they kind of lose it, either from, the amount of time between the half days, or they wouldn't finish the half days. They wouldn't carry the work through to completion in the way that happens so beautifully in that 3-day container. And, once you break that momentum, it's really hard to rebuild. You're getting back, you're kind of returning more to that 50-minute model, not quite the same, but where it's like problem of the week and how have things been, You don't have that momentum, right? And then maybe they don't come back and your practice isn't looking the way you want it to, right? And that's why the 3-day intensive model works so differently, right? It provides so much time and space and containment, right? When a client is committing to 3 consecutive days, maybe they're not consecutive. For me, the ideal is I like to do Monday, Wednesday, Friday in a week. I think having the 2 days in between to integrate and process is great. But they organize their life around that time when they're doing it. Like this is a serious commitment they're making. They're setting aside a week of their life, right? They're reducing those outside distractions. For me, they're often coming to another state, right? They're staying away from their home, they're all that stuff, which is going to create such a different experience. And they enter a different state of mind and of being. And so do you as the clinician. And that's part of the magic of this container, right? You get continuity, you get depth, you get flow, and you get completion to some degree. And I think that what can feel counterintuitive is when we offer more flexibility in our possibilities, 3 hours here, 3 hours there, more options, more entry points. We think maybe that'll make it easier for people to say yes. I don't think it does. I really don't think it does. Structure really does something powerful. It sends that signal. This work is so important. This requires your full presence. This is so different from what you've done before. You're going to show up differently. The clinician shows up differently. And so, if they're not fully committed in this way, or as committed as they can be, the work just doesn't happen in the same way. Not because they don't want it, because the structure isn't holding them in the same way, right? And your practice structure, you are dictating this. So when you're offering a multi-day intensive, you're creating this beautiful container and structure for them, but also for you, right? It provides containment for you as well. Part of the things that it contains are you're not having those ongoing client sessions. 3 half-hour or half-day intensives over the course of a couple months is still an ongoing client relationship. Maybe you're wanting to step away from that some. You're still going to have some of that between session stuff when you have the 3 half days, right? So where does this containment and this structure adjustment and this structure provision for the client, where does it start? It starts in the consultation call. Well, I would argue it starts before in how you present it on your website, okay? That you want it on your website to say, this is what I offer, 3-day intensive, that's what I offer. That's already going to lay the groundwork, okay? And it's going to protect you from offering something that, you don't really want to offer because your website doesn't even talk about it. So it starts there. But the call is really important, okay? It's not, of course, the consultation call is not just informational, right? You're, of course, you're explaining the model, you're giving them some info about what intensives are, you answer their questions, you're talking about scheduling, but it is also clinical work. One therapist I work with shared something really powerful about how she sees the consultation call, because we've talked some about how some practitioners have gotten to a place and, hey, like for them, great, I'm so thrilled you can do this. I don't know how to do this, but I loved how this person framed it. Well, what I was going to say is, I'm sorry, some practitioners no longer even do a consult call. They schedule the intensive over email or something, whatever. I still like to have the face-to-face virtual call. But what this one therapist was saying is one of the reasons she likes the consultation call, and she says, I always tell a potential client, it's going to be 20 to 30 minutes, sort of an open-ended time. And that's important because she finds that when the call consistently runs over that time, that might be showing that containment is an issue for this client. Maybe they need containment. Maybe they're struggling with this kind of boundary. And that might not mean that they're not a good fit for an intensive, but it is very good information for you. This person was saying she likes to use it as a way to help her decide if an intensive is a good fit or not. She feels like if the person cannot kind of respond to that amount of containment, it can be hard. I don't think that's always true, but I thought that was a really interesting framing. And that she sort of sees it as an assessment of readiness, right? And she's also listening for like, what kind of internal, external resources do they have? Do they have some stability so they can tolerate this kind of work? Can they handle engaging within a structure like the consult call? And that matches well onto intensives because just like a consultation call, intensives are not open-ended, right? And you need to be able to stay inside the process. And so she sort of says like, there's moments when the answer is no, and that's not a failure for her, nor should it be. It just really helps her maintain the integrity of her work. Okay. And so I thought that was really interesting, the way she thinks about the consultation call and just in general, right? Like there are situations where an intensive might not be appropriate. Maybe not never, but not at this time, right? Maybe you have a client who's just been discharged from inpatient care, someone who is acutely using substances. Acutely isn't the right word, someone who kind of wants a quick fix, but doesn't have a lot of other supports, like maybe another therapist or people in their lives. That's also helpful for you when you're thinking about structure and containment and the kind of practice you want, is if you're using that consult call as really good clinical information to help you decide, you're not excluding clients, you're protecting the container, you're protecting the structure. And so the consult call can be a way to look at clinical discernment. You use your clinical discernment, you can look at like boundary setting, like how does this client respond to like a time limit, right? And how will they respond to kind of expectation alignment? So is the client ready to do this level of work with this level of structure? And yeah, you can't always know that from the consult call, but I thought some of these ideas are things to kind of let percolate, because part of what you want to do in that consult call is, because you ideally have your one offering for your intensive that you like to do, that you're going to pitch it in that consultation call, and you're going to get a really good sense of, is this person the right one? Is this the right option for this person? And if it's not the right option for this person, it doesn't mean you should give them another option. That's another place where I see the structure that therapists so desperately want for their practices to start to fall apart. They panic. They're like, I need this client. Let me just shift this up and say, I'll do this instead. I really, really urge you to sit with that discomfort and be okay with it not being the right fit for everyone. It's only going to benefit you in the long run. Okay. The third piece of this episode that we're going to talk about is what happens after the client says, yes, I want to go ahead with this 3-day intensive. This is where things can start to break down again for therapists in terms of creating this practice structure, is policies and procedures, and how deciding what that structure looks like for you is vital in making sure that you are creating this practice that is going to work for you for the long term. So now that we're talking container, let's go deeper, like I said, into the policies and procedures, that piece of practice structure, and the ones that I see as really essential to moving ahead successfully with designing an intensive practice. And what happens without those policies? Well, imagine you get a client who books a multi-day intensive, your 3-day intensive, and you don't have a really, really solid policy, and they cancel at the last minute, or they ask to reschedule again and again, or you are on the consult call with them and they just say, I'm really interested. I really like these dates that you mentioned. I just need a little more time to decide. And you're holding the space in the calendar and time goes on and you send emails and you don't hear and you're like, and you don't have any policies that you have set in stone. They're going to give you security and answers. And like I said, security for you is also security for them. It's containment. And all this is a really easy, I don't know, but fast, quick way to create stress, instability, and financial loss in that intensive practice. But, the issue is not the client who's wavering or who's not getting back to you or whatever. It's the structure. We, as the therapist, are responsible for creating that structure and holding that frame. So it can be easy to be like, oh, the client doesn't want to do it or they're being wishy-washy. Well, if we don't give them the option, because of our policies and procedures being really, really robust, to be wishy-washy, then we don't have to feel that resentment. We don't have to, pass any of that on to the client. It's on us to create that structure, to make that structure very, very clear, and to uphold it. So it's important to think that our policies are not just administrative. They have a clinical element to them. They are part of this container, this clinical container that creates safety, that creates security, that creates a feeling of, I know what to expect. I know what this therapist is going to ask of me, and I am agreeing to it, and we are all on the same page. That does create safety. People are taking on something big by agreeing to a multi-day intensive. You want them to have a feeling of maybe not ease, but like security about knowing what it is that they're agreeing to, knowing what it is they've signed on for. And that's the clinical piece, right? One therapist I worked with shared that she lost about like $3,000 from 2 last-minute intensive cancellations when she didn't have these policies in place. And, that kind of loss doesn't just impact your income, right? Your nervous system takes a hit. You feel uncertain. You start to feel that resentment, right? And then you're going to hesitate to put yourself out there to try to book more intensive clients. So it's really harming you both clinically and in terms of building this practice. So clear, firm, and consistent structure in these policies is the way. I think it's so vital to have a non-refundable deposit for your intensive. Most therapists I work with, it's 25 to 50% of the total fee to hold the days of the intensive. This, of course, protects your time, and it signals commitment on their side and on your side. You're both committing to showing up for the work in a very real way. And with, so that's one thing, right? The deposit. And then another thing that's really important, I think, is a defined decision window, right? If you have a consult with someone, they're like, oh, I'm not sure, I need to talk about it. Say, okay, great. We've talked about these days, to hold your slot, I will need this signed agreement back from you 72 hours, 3 business days, 5 business days, a week, whatever it is. I wouldn't go longer than a week, honestly. They don't get unlimited time to think about it. They're going to drop off if that happens, right? And they need to secure that spot. They need to lock it in, because you can't just be wondering in terms of your income and your schedule, is this person going to take that? And if they pass that window, the space opens to someone else. And what holds that space for them? For me, it's the deposit and the returned intensive agreement, which has all the policies about cancellation and rescheduling and payment and stuff like that in it. And which I go over with people in the consult. If they're like, okay, I'm ready, I'm interested in these days, say, great. I'm going to send you this paperwork. It has those days in there. I put them into the agreement. When you return this to me with the deposit, within this amount of time, consider those days yours. If I don't hear back from you within this, decision window, those days are no longer reserved for you, right? And when you're just holding that space for them, it creates ambiguity. It weakens commitment on your side and on their side. There's nothing wrong with, in fact, and there's lots right, with really needing that time to be, that decision-making time not to be too long. I think it's so vital. Okay. And then there's scheduling of the actual intensive, and rescheduling and cancellation, right? I advise, do not book it piece by piece, right? I think you should schedule everything when they put their deposit down. Part of what's happening there is you're scheduling everything, their intake, all their intensive days, maybe their follow-up session if you want to. I find that I tend to not do that just because at that point they've already paid everything they're going to want their follow-up session. Usually I'm not worried about that, and I want to give it like a month, and it's only a 90-minute session, so it's not like it's that hard for me to fit it in. But if you want to have that all scheduled up front, by all means do that. And this creates this like contained arc of care, containment, rather than this like loose collection of appointments here and there. And I also don't like it when, like for me, an intensive is supposed to be Monday, Wednesday, Friday of a single week. It doesn't always work out that way. I think I was saying this earlier, but because people are often coming to me to do these, it does, because they're not going to want to spread it out over 3 weeks. But if it's somebody local, I also think you should try to keep it contained in terms of time. And then, of course, rescheduling boundaries. For me, you can reschedule one time your intensive, one time. After that, you're forfeiting the deposit and we're not rescheduling again. There's a certain time frame during which they can rebook, up to a week before. They can reschedule that one time without penalty. And then there's other things in terms of like, outside the allowed window. You can see in the paperwork that you get if you work with me that I have certain timelines around, what if they complete 2 days and want to cancel the third or whatever. Basically, I'm protecting myself and them. I'm protecting my money and time, but also protecting them. And again, if you want paperwork for this, if you work together with me in my one-to-one coaching, which I have a few slots that I'm booking right now, you'll get all of this and we'll work on tailoring it exactly to what you want it to be. You don't have to use the policies that I've developed, but the guideline that I give you allows you to think through really clearly what your policies need to be for you to feel safe and contained. And when policies are unclear or flexible, I know clients can feel that. They feel it in our sort of sense of not feeling secure, right? And that does not feel good to them. They might not be able to name it, but I don't think it feels good on their end either. It creates anxiety, creates ambivalence, and then we get that lack of follow through, which hurts everyone. Clear structure creates safety, predictability, commitment, containment, right? Your policies are communicating something clinically, right? Not just administratively. They're communicating that this work matters. It requires investment. And this space is being held for just you with care and intention. Your policies help clients realize how seriously they are taking this work. Okay. That's, just a brief overview. There's so much more I could go into detail about here, but that's something I'd love to talk to you about one-on-one if you really want to get into the nitty-gritty of this. But just sort of a framing of that idea of containment and how all this stuff, containment is really vital to creating a viable intensive model for your practice and one that works really well for clients. The part 2 of this episode, we're really going to talk about looking at your schedule for your practice. What does a month of your schedule look like? And how do we structure it so you're doing this work in the way that you want to be doing it, financially, time, clinically, without burning yourself out. And this does not mean you have to get rid of all of your weekly clients. Okay, just you can't, that is something that you can do, but you don't have to, because I know that a lot of people get stuck on that. But that's next week's episode. So I hope this was helpful to get you thinking about this somewhat. I'm in the show notes. There's a link to book a consult call with me if you want to talk about some of these one-to-one coaching options. I do have a few slots right now. But I hope this gave you some food for thought about how really everything we do in terms of how we set up our intensive practice helps to create safety and containment for the client. And that only serves to benefit both the client and you as the clinician. All right, everyone. Thank you as always for listening to the podcast, and part 2 of this coming next week. Take care. Bye.